At the alumni reunion, old classmates toasted Ethan. Old classmate, I also have some business in the building materials industry. Please take care of me in the future. Ethan, you are now the idol of our group. It's rare to see you. Come on, I'll toast you a glass. You're right. Usually we have to make an appointment in advance to see you. Today you can't get away. Come on, drink more. The toast was drunk in one gulp, but Ethan only took a sip of the wine glass. But no one said anything. Ethan is no longer the poor student with a tight budget. He has nearly 10 billion yuan in assets and his company is located in the city center, where every inch of land is worth a lot of money. There are mountains and seas in front and behind. I don't know how many people envy him. At the table, I sat in the corner and focused on my phone. Suddenly someone shouted at me, Lily, don't just look at your phone. You and Ethan used to be so good. Come over and say a few words. The person next to him bumped him twice, you have no eyes. Sophia is sitting next to Ethan. How long ago was Lily's story? As soon as this was said, everyone's eyes turned back and forth between me, Ethan and Sophia. I looked at Ethan, who was surrounded by the first seat, and he was looking at me. We looked at each other in silence, and no one spoke first. Although we talked about almost everything in the past, Ethan and I are neighbors and grew up in the same yard since we were young. When I was 4 or 5 years old, I was playing with cotton dolls at the door and heard a sharp cry from the house next door, mixed with dirty words and insults. I was scared and cried, and went home to find my mother. My mother carried me to the neighbor's house to argue. I knocked on the door that was always closed, and I saw Ethan standing in the shadows with bruises all over his body. He was very silent when he was a child, even silent to the point of numbness. He had so many wounds on his body, but he didn't even frown, as if he didn't feel any pain at all. My mother threw me to the ground, rolled up her sleeves and scolded Ethan's father. When my mother was young, she was a famous shrew in the surrounding area. Although her reputation was a bit ugly, it was very deterrent and no one dared to bully her. Even my father was always scolded by my mother and hung his head, sitting on the threshold of the old house and sighing. I walked to Ethan with my short legs, holding his face with my hands and blowing air on his face. I'll blow it for you, just blow it and it will be fine. Ethan looked at me expressionlessly. I didn't know how to distinguish people's emotions at that time. Even if he ignored me, I would still smile at him foolishly. From that day on, I knew that the brother next door who was 1 year older than me was always beaten and scolded by his father. His mother couldn't stand the days of fear all day and ran away secretly, leaving him alone to bear all the anger from an irritable adult. My mother felt sorry for him, so she often asked me to bring him food and take him out to play after school so that he would be beaten less. Ethan was always too lazy to pay attention to me at first, but I hung on him like a little koala, and over time, he slowly began to respond to me. When I was in elementary school, a classmate always liked to pull my hair. I was pulled so hard that I cried loudly. Ethan knew about it, so he came over and beat that classmate severely. Of course, he was also injured, but when I saw that classmate crying louder than me, I was suddenly filled with admiration for Ethan. Ethan blushed. What's the big deal? If he bullies you again, come find me. I remembered it, and he remembered it too. From that day on, I would think of him first when I encountered something, and run to his class to whisper to him. From the first double perfect score, the first menstrual period, to the first love letter, and finally to the worries about the college entrance examination, he has always been like when I was a child, comforting me, solving my problems, and protecting me all the way. When did it start? Ethan and I don't have so much to talk about, probably since Sophia appeared. Ethan and Sophia are in the same major, and they have a lot of common topics to talk about, so I went from getting all of him to getting half of him. The alumni meeting was still noisy, and a few unfamiliar alumni made fun of me. Hey Lily, let's talk. It's rare for us to get together. That's right. We are all old classmates. Why are you so reserved? Hey, what are you looking at Ethan for? He's not still attached to me, is he? I was pulled to my feet and pushed to Ethan's side. I almost bumped into the corner of the table. Ethan put a hand behind my waist, but he didn't get too close to me, as if he was just being a gentleman. I'm not used to being surrounded and watched by so many people, so I denied it and said, Ethan and I are over. I'm married. As soon as I finished speaking, I saw Ethan's movements freeze. The surroundings were silent for a few seconds. However, it soon became lively again. No one was willing to let me, the fun, disappear. After graduating for many years, those who have achieved success, and those who have achieved fame have achieved fame. I, who have achieved nothing, naturally became the object of everyone's ridicule and amusement. Don't lie, you don't look like a married person at all. I know you want to save face, but you can't just say such things. I said, I'm really married. They still didn't believe it. Look at you, if you are really married, why don't you bring your husband? Yes, where is your husband? I thought for a while and whispered, he is a little busy and can't come for the time being. No one believed it, even Ethan relaxed a little from his previous stiffness. Someone wanted to say more, but Sophia stopped him with a smile. Okay, everyone should stop asking about other people's private affairs all the time, and concentrate on drinking. After today, I don't know when we can get together again. Sophia's words now have weight, and since she said so, everyone naturally stopped holding on to me. In the evening, everyone dispersed in groups of 3 or 2. In the end, only Ethan, Sophia and I were left. Ethan didn't talk to Sophia, but turned his head and walked towards me. Every time he took a step forward, I stepped back a little. So he stopped and asked me, "Are you afraid of me? Come here, I'll take you home." I said, "No, someone will pick me up later." Ethan's face darkened and he asked tentatively, "Is he your husband?" "No." Sophia probably couldn't wait any longer, so she walked forward and took Ethan's arm affectionately. "Lily, let Ethan take you there, we don't have anything else to do anyway, it's okay to take you there." I still shook my head and repeated, "Someone will come to pick me up in a while, you guys go first." Ethan seemed to have run out of patience, and he shook Sophia off, stretched out his arm to hold my wrist, and tried to pull me away. Just when I didn't know what to do, the person who was picking me up finally arrived. The dark Maybach stopped at the steps outside the door with the double flash on. The legendary Ryan finally arrived. The car door opened, Ryan ran over hurriedly with an umbrella, and I realized that it had been drizzling without knowing when. The rain was very fine, and people would only feel that their bodies were wet as if they were surrounded by fog, and they had to look carefully at the ground to find that it was raining. Ryan walked up to me and whispered, "Miss Lily?" I nodded. He breathed a sigh of relief. "Get in the car, I'll take you home." He saw Ethan, and Ethan saw him. But Ryan didn't seem to want to greet Ethan now, just nodded as a greeting. I pulled my wrist out of Ethan's hand and followed Ryan into the car. In fact, Ryan and I are not very familiar with each other, and I am not very good at dealing with these upper-class people, so I had to pretend to be a wooden man in the car. But Ryan is very talkative, he took the initiative to talk. "I saw you briefly in the UK last time, I guess you don't remember me." I said, "I remember. Your name is Ryan, you are the president of Shell Group Asia, Edward told me that you are very powerful." "Well, Edward, you are too kind, I can't compare my achievements with him. It's not easy for you to return to China, Edward has explained everything, if you need anything, please contact me." "Okay, thank you." In addition to attending the Alumni Association, the most important thing for me to return to China is to go home to see my parents. I haven't seen my parents for half a year. Ryan wanted to take me upstairs, but he saw that my parents were waiting for me outside the unit door, so he turned the car around and left. I looked at my parents, they seemed to be a little older than before. I shouted in a cheerful tone, "Mom and Dad, I'm back." Then I supported one of them with one hand, and stepped into the home I had left for 6 years again with the old couple saying, "I'm glad to be back." When I entered the door, the table was already full of my favorite dishes. I wanted to run to get chopsticks like I used to, but I found that even the chopsticks were already set. I wanted to cry a little, probably because I was moved. I always felt that I hadn't had such a warm moment with my parents for a long time. My parents knew that I had been to the Alumni Association, and they mentioned it very tactfully. "Did you have a good time at the Alumni Association today? Did you meet any bad people or things?" I knew that they were beating around the bush, actually referring to Ethan, but they were so careful, I didn't care much. "I met Ethan. He seems to be with Sophia. They are a good match." My mother sighed, "Ethan is really. He used to be your best friend. You two have played together since you were 3 or 4 years old. Forget it, let's not talk about him." Then she asked about my recent situation abroad. I said, "It's fine. I have stopped taking the medicine now. Dr. Laura said I can go for a follow-up consultation in a month." When I went to the UK, I had severe depression and was treated in Dr. Laura's private clinic for 6 years. Until last week, Dr. Laura said that my examination had basically met the standards and I could return to normal life as long as I kept a happy mood. My parents looked very happy. That's right. It was obviously me who got sick, but it tortured the 3 of us. Oh no, there was another person, Edward. He was also tortured by me, but fortunately, we don't have to worry anymore. I secretly glanced at my parents' expressions and decided not to say anything for now. Some of the parties involved are not here. If I said something like, "Who got married?" I would have to bear the storm from my parents alone. I also made a few friends when I was in school, but after 6 years, I can't find them anymore. And last time I went to the alumni meeting, I thought they would attend, so I went to them, but they seemed to have agreed not to go. I didn't go to work, and wandered around the city during the day. After a few days, I felt that I couldn't be so idle, so I found a volunteer job. It happened to be the weekend, so I volunteered in the museum, taking promotional photos, guiding tourists, etc. When Ethan came over, I had just changed into Hanfu and was wearing a necklace. Because I changed my clothes in a makeshift hut, there was no mirror, so I had to rely on my senses. I glanced at my shadow in the French window and thought the clothes were okay, so I focused on the necklace. The clasp of the necklace was very small, and I fumbled for a long time but couldn't put it on properly. A pair of hands took the end of the necklace from behind me and quickly fastened the clasp. I turned around, and before I could say, "Thank you," I could see that the person in front of me was Ethan. Ethan first looked at my clothes, his frown relaxed a little, and said, "It looks good. Are you a volunteer here?" "Yes." "Then can you lead me?" "I want to go to Holby." I said, "I'll ask a colleague to lead you. I'm going to take a group of publicity photos." Ethan nodded. "No hurry, I'll wait for you." He said so I had to rush to the small square and leave him aside first. Ethan didn't leave. I could still see his figure from a distance. He was looking at me all the time during the publicity photo shoot. If it was 6 years ago, I would be so nervous and blushing when he looked at me like this, and I wouldn't be able to take any promotional photos. But now I just looked away naturally. Since we have both started a new life, why can't we just treat each other as dead? It seems that neither of us is a qualified ex. In my sophomore year, Ethan and I officially established a relationship. At first, he was the first to speak. Because I received a confession from another classmate and he knew about it, he ran to ask me nervously if I accepted the confession from another classmate. I spread my hands. "No, I don't even know that classmate." Ethan breathed a sigh of relief and said to me earnestly, "That's right, those classmates you don't know are not reliable at all. If you want to have a relationship, talk to me. Do you understand?" "Got it." Ethan didn't leave immediately. He waited for a while, brewing his emotions, and then asked awkwardly, "Do you want to fall in love now?" "Now?" Actually, I didn't want to fall in love at that time, but if it was Ethan, it would be good to talk about it. I moved forward on my toes, tilted my head and curved my eyes at him. "Okay." Now thinking about it, it seems that relationships that are easy to establish are also easy to break up, because people often don't cherish things that are not formal enough. If our relationship started with him holding a bouquet of flowers, on the playground with small colored lights, with many classmates cheering, and congratulating, would the result be different? It's too late to think about these now. Between us, it's a foregone conclusion. After taking the promotional photos, Ethan was still standing there, his eyes never left me, and when he saw me finishing my work, he called me over. I said, "Did you come here by yourself? Where's Sophia?" He was puzzled. "I came to the museum. What does it have to do with her? Aren't you together?" "I thought you came together." "Who told you we were together? Are you jealous?" Just as I was about to say no, he smiled. "We are not together. We only went to the alumni meeting last time because we happened to meet her on the road. Let's go, take me to Holby first." I saw that he didn't want to talk about Sophia anymore, so I took him to Holby. As we walked, he suddenly asked again, "How did you know Ryan who came to pick you up last time?" I thought about it and decided to tell the truth. Actually, we are not familiar with each other. He only knows my husband. My husband is on a business trip in Switzerland, so I asked him first. Before I finished speaking, I saw Ethan 2 steps behind me and stopped. I turned my head. "What's wrong?" The blood on his face faded, and his lips opened and closed several times before he finally made a sound. "You, mister?" he asked in a hoarse voice. "What mister?" I came to my senses. Last time I said I was married, none of them believed me. Do I really look like someone who is not married? I looked at his expression as if he was abandoned by a heartless person, and said lightly, "Ethan, I am really married." He smiled unkindly. "If you want to use marriage as an excuse to stay away from me, then you." I used my index finger to hook out the necklace around my neck. It was the necklace he had put on for me not long ago. Under the pure gold chain was a sparkling diamond ring. I said, "This is my wedding ring. I was afraid of losing it, so I always wear it." "Ethan, I didn't lie to you, and I didn't want to save face at the alumni meeting." The fallen leaves were swept into the wind, swirling and stopping at my feet. After an unknown amount of time, I heard him mechanically say, "When did it happen?" "Not long ago. To be specific, it should be last month, but it seems unnecessary to explain such details to Ethan." Ethan was a little unsteady. "Lily, you know what? Sophia is not my girlfriend. She wasn't in the past, and she won't be in the future. I know she likes me, but I never agreed." "Do you know why?" I looked at him and said nothing. He spoke each word by word. "Because I was waiting for you to return home." "Lily, I waited for you for 6 years, but you got married?" He covered his face and asked with sobs in the small square with people coming and going, "How can you be like this?" I lowered my head to look at the ground, and after a long while I said, "I didn't know you were waiting for me. Didn't you tell me to get out?" And I looked at the pedestrians carefully and said in a voice that only he could hear, "And, don't you dislike me?" "I didn't. How could I dislike you?" It was just that my mind was too confused at that time. "I thought you got into trouble because you were deceived to find me. I would feel guilty when I saw you. I broke up with you." It was nonsense. It's just that I didn't think it through at the moment. I never thought about leaving you, never thought about it. After being with Ethan, he treated me better. After class, he would run around most of the school to our teaching building to pick me up. When I was lazy and didn't want to go to the cafeteria, he would order takeout for me. My hand speed in selecting courses was not good, and he was guarding the computer early to grab courses for me. When I was taking the certificate exam, he went through all the books on our major to help me, then highlighted the key points and found online courses for me. In Ethan's eyes, any of my small and insignificant successes were great achievements that could be praised, and even if I made a huge mistake, Ethan would just rub my hair and say nothing, and then help me solve the mess. Perhaps it was because he was so good and so outstanding that I was not the only one who wanted to be with him. When I first knew about Sophia's existence, I didn't take it seriously. Although Ethan and her spent a lot of time talking about professional courses together, he didn't pay attention to me like he did when we were children. But I know that to Ethan, she is just a familiar classmate, and no matter how heated the discussion between Ethan and her is, as long as I appear, Ethan will immediately pack his school bag and run to me. I thought that we are all adults, and Sophia will give up Ethan after seeing his rejection. But the fact is just the opposite. Sophia said to me, I have always been a strong person. I must get what I want. I didn't care, yeah, okay. In essence, I still didn't regard her as an opponent, because I knew that Ethan's heart was with me. But not long after, I suffered a loss. I fell the biggest fall in my life. It was not until now, 6 years later, that I got up again. It was a drizzling night. One of Ethan's roommates suddenly called me. He said that Ethan had a fight with a student from another department in the back mountain of the school and asked me to help. I didn't think about it. I hung up the phone and ran to the back mountain. I called Ethan halfway, but he didn't answer, so I ran faster, just wanting to quickly confirm Ethan's safety. But there was no Ethan on the mountain, only a mentally ill strange middle-aged man. He dragged me into the woods. I struggled desperately, but I didn't have as much strength as him. I don't know how long it took. Ethan came, I lay on the ground and retched, but I couldn't spit out the disgusting things no matter what. I wanted Ethan to hug me, but when he saw me, he subconsciously took a few steps back. Later I thought that there were signs before anything happened, such as the separation of Ethan and I. If he hadn't found me that night, maybe I would have pretended that I hadn't gone out to find him that night after several days of self-torture, and kept this matter to myself. Or, if he didn't subconsciously take those few steps back, even if he didn't hug me, but just stood there and looked at me, I wouldn't be so embarrassed. But none of them happened. I recalled his actions and expressions that night countless times, and finally understood that it was actually a kind of disgust. But I knew that I couldn't blame him for this, because he didn't know anything, and he couldn't bear this kind of unwarranted responsibility in vain. Sophia said that she didn't blame her, because she just bribed Ethan's roommate to trick me to the mountain, and then let a few classmates who hid in the corner in advance shout and scare me. She said she had never thought that I would be so unlucky. The man was from the village behind the mountain. Normally, he would never climb over the mountain to our school. Who knew that I would meet him by chance? But if I don't blame him or her, then who should I blame for my experience? I couldn't figure it out, I really couldn't figure it out. Just when I couldn't figure it out, Ethan told me that he wanted to break up with me. But he said it more tactfully. He said that he felt that I was rash to find him without knowing whether he was on the mountain. This kind of character really bothered him, so he wanted to reconsider our relationship. I thought this reason for breaking up was a bit ridiculous, but seeing him standing so far away from me, I didn't dare to ask more. He said, "Give me some time to calm down, okay?" I said yes at the time, but in the next few days, I was too insecure and kept wanting to find him. He was probably tired of me, so he blamed me loudly and scolded me for not giving him some time alone. He said he hadn't thought about it yet. Could I please not disturb him? I stood opposite him, lowered my head and begged him not to be angry, whispering, "Then when will you think it through?" He threw his school bag to the ground and said, "I can't think it through. I feel sick when I see you now. Get out. Get out." I shuddered and ran away quickly. At that time, I was about to graduate. I was depressed in the dormitory and did something that hurt myself. Fortunately, my roommates who came back from self-study saw me. They sent me to the hospital and barely saved my life. I woke up in the hospital and saw my mother's cheeks covered with tears, and my father sat on a chair with his hands on his forehead, sighing. To this day, I don't know whether my parents knew what happened in school at that time. All I know is that when my mother saw me wake up, she asked gently, "Baby, can I send you to England? Your uncle is there, let him take care of you for a while, and we won't see the annoying people anymore, okay?" I hid in her chest, crying until my voice was hoarse, and I said, "Mom, I'm in so much pain." In the first 2 years after arriving in England, I was not in a good mental state, so my uncle made an appointment with a psychologist for me. Every weekend I went to Dr. Laura's clinic. It was more like an alternative chat than a treatment. Dr. Laura was knowledgeable and would tell me fairy tales, legendary historical stories, the universe, the Renaissance, and the lame puppy she raised. Although the puppy limps and runs slowly, it can eat with big mouthfuls and play with a ball in the yard. When I get home from get off work, it will run towards me with its soft ears like jelly. Puppies are the most healing animals in the world. I also like puppies and nodded, yes, the earth can't turn without puppies. Chio, Dr. Laura said, you too, you should eat well and be happy. You are the most beautiful Oriental girl I have ever seen. Anyone who makes you cry will be punished by God. My nose was sour all of a sudden. Later, every time I went to Dr. Laura's clinic, I felt like a normal person. I was not going for treatment, but just to see a friend who was very good at chatting. Edward also met in the clinic. Dr. Laura was his aunt, and they didn't contact each other very often. Once, he drove by here and gave Dr. Laura a set of ruby necklaces that he had just taken pictures of. At that time, Dr. Laura happened to go to the bathroom, and I observed the pot of mimosa that Dr. Laura raised by the window. Edward stood at the door and knocked on the door frame. I turned around and met this handsome young man in a suit. He seemed to be stunned, not saying a word, just looking at me stupidly with a pair of passionate peach blossom eyes. My hand touched the mimosa, and the mimosa tightly closed its leaves. Ethan stood there for a long time before he asked in a hoarse voice again, then the two of us, is there still room for maneuver? I shook my head lightly. He seemed to have aged instantly, staggering away with a bent back. My cell phone rang at around 8 o'clock in the evening. I thought it was Edward because he always called me at night these days. When I picked up the phone, I found it was an unfamiliar voice. Lily? Ethan is drunk and keeps calling you. Can you come pick him up? I said, it's not appropriate for me to pick him up. I'm married, and I don't dare to go out at night without someone to accompany me. On the other end of the phone, Ethan had already grabbed the phone noisily and cried to me, Lily, don't leave me, please. Not long after I hung up, the phone rang again, this time it was Edward. Edward said happily on the other end, I will go back to China tomorrow. Do you need me to pick you up? No, but you need to wait for me at home. My parents are at home. If you come, remember to wear something thicker. Huh? What do you mean? Some people don't even visit their parents before coaxing a girl to get married. If I were here, I would definitely be beaten up by my father. Edward laughed. I didn't think it through. I will go and apologize soon. My wife will help me say good things to my father-in-law, okay? Then you have to get there early. I said, Edward, I will always wait for you at home. After Edward and I met once at Dr. Laura's clinic, Britain suddenly became as small as a small community. Edward and I often met each other like neighbors who would see each other every day. I met him again on the road when I went to the studio. Because it was raining at that time, I slipped on the road. After slipping, I didn't stand up immediately, but sat on the ground for a while. It's not that I didn't want to remember, but my eyes suddenly went dark, and there was a long squeak sound in my ears, like an auditory hallucination, or tinnitus. For a short time, I couldn't see or hear, but I could feel the dirt on my palms, and my pants were wet. I didn't know what to do until a pair of hands grabbed my waist and picked me up. The chaotic voices turned into Edward's stern scolding. What are you doing sitting on the side of the road? It's raining, do you want to catch a cold? I didn't recognize his voice on the spot, I just felt that a kind gentleman helped me up. I must have been very pitiful and scared. I asked this kind gentleman, can you help me? I can't see. Edward immediately picked me up horizontally and sent me to the hospital. I later learned that it was just a mentally unstable state when depression attacks. In fact, I can see and hear, but my mental state is wrong. I thought I couldn't see or hear. Edward sent me to the hospital. I thought he was a kind person, and I allowed him to get close without knowing it. He also sensed my acquiescence, so he pressed on step by step, narrowing the distance between us inch by inch. It wasn't until Edward said he wanted to be my boyfriend that I started to get scared and wanted to escape. Unfortunately, Edward had already prepared for it, and I couldn't run away at all. I had to stumble and tell him about my past. I also told him that I didn't get a college diploma, so I felt like a failure. I said, after you understand the real me, you won't want to be with me anymore. I tried to scare him off with my shameful past, but he held my hand tightly. He rested his chin on my shoulder and said with a morbid persistence, you want to scare me? No way. Lily, what can I do? I like you more. No matter what you were like in the past, I don't care. This is England. People only enjoy themselves in the moment. The past and the future are meaningless at this moment. Don't tell me those useless words. Just tell me directly whether you agree to be my girlfriend or not. I was held by him, and I was empty for a while, and finally compromised and said, okay, if you don't mind. He tilted his head, gently held my earlobe, and laughed. Edward's personality is completely different from Ethan's. He is often gentle, smiling, and not easily quarreling with others, but he is not easy to mess with. After we lived together, I often saw some people who claimed to be secretaries or assistants come to my house. They greeted me friendly, entered the study tremblingly, and left after a while, sniffing and aggrieved. I thanked my luck countless times. It turns out that Edward is a strict boss, and these people in suits and ties with an elitist air can also be scolded so badly. Fortunately, I am not his subordinate, and fortunately Edward is very tolerant of his girlfriend. Edward and I weren't in a long-term relationship, but it lasted for several years. He wasn't in a hurry to propose to me because I was still going to Dr. Laura's clinic every week at that time, and he wanted to wait until I got better. But I don't mean to rush you or dislike you now, he said. I just think that when you get better, you may get more real happiness from being proposed to. Lily, my hugs, my kisses, and my love are all real. I want you to feel it. Later, my condition kept getting better and better, and he proposed to me. Like other cliched men, she held up the ring and asked foolishly, "Will you marry me?" It wasn't a very remarkable scene, but at that moment, a kind of happiness beyond the world hit my heart like a flood, and I was almost knocked over, followed by a rapid heartbeat. While condemning my restless heartbeat, I stretched out my hand and said, "Okay." And just like that, I agreed to the proposal. Later I asked Edward, "Did you marry me out of sympathy, pity, or a sense of responsibility?" He said, "No." I asked again, "Is it out of love?" He replied, "To say I like you is too perfunctory, and to say I love you is too formal. If I have to say it, it's probably like, love, and possessive. It's all three. I met you when I was 26 years old." After despising the term love at first sight for more than 20 years, fate's punishment finally came to me. "Lily, have I ever told you? From the first time I saw you, I felt that you would be my wife in the future." I said, "You didn't tell me. But you seemed very happy every time you were with me." Lily, people are like this. When you are with someone you like, you will be happy unconsciously. Even if it is just a small thing, you will remember it for a long time when you think about it in the future. What he said made sense. Edward was always very reasonable. On the day Ethan got drunk, Sophia finally took him away, which was a good thing, but for some reason, Ethan had a big fight with her that night. The specific situation is unclear, but it is only known that Sophia came out of Ethan's house crying, stepped on the accelerator and went to the highway, resulting in a car accident and amputation of her right leg. Not only that, because she was speeding and was fully responsible, the driver of the other car that collided with her was not seriously injured, but he blamed her, asking for millions of dollars and threatening to sue her. She lost her right leg and was blackmailed again, and she was busy for a while. Ethan did not help her, but from that day on, Ethan became a little decadent. I didn't pay more attention to it, because Edward finally came back. He was carrying a small box in his hand, wearing a long windbreaker, knocking on the door in a dusty manner. The moment he saw me, he hugged me tightly. "Sorry for the long wait, Lily." I hugged his waist and was very excited. "It wasn't long, you came back just in time." My parents knew that Edward and I were together, but they didn't know that we got married behind their backs. As expected, after hearing that Edward and I had registered in the UK, my father started to circle around the house, looking for a feather duster to beat someone. I wanted to say a few good words for Edward, but Edward's eloquence was much better than mine. He comforted my father with a few words and promised that the wedding would be held in the UK and China. With one more person in the house, it was even more lively. Edward played chess with my father, and was defeated by my father. He was not angry. He remained calm even after losing several times. He smiled and said, "Dad is still a better chess player." I came out of the kitchen after cutting the fruit and happened to hear him say this. He took off his windbreaker, leaving only a thin beige sweater. He looked gentle and steady. It is difficult for me to describe the feeling of that moment in words. I just felt that the time I had lost was made up and my heart was filled. Edward was also very busy after returning to China. When I was still sleeping, he kissed me on the forehead and told me where he was going. I responded, but in fact I had forgotten most of it after waking up. The only remaining memory was like, I made an appointment with someone to eat, inspect, in the afternoon, come back, call. I had nothing to do after getting up, so I took the initiative to contract the task of going to the supermarket to buy. After Edward returned to China, the person who accompanied him on his trips became Ryan, and Ryan's original driver was left to me, which was also a ready-made bargain. I was pushing my shopping cart around the vegetable section when I suddenly heard a familiar voice. "Have you heard? Ethan and Sophia broke up." "What do you mean by broken up? Are they getting along?" "Of course. Isn't it said that Sophia is Ethan's girlfriend?" "It's just a rumor. Ethan himself hasn't admitted it. I think his mind is full of Lily." At the last alumni reunion, I stared at him all night. My goodness, his eyes must have been glued to Lily. I couldn't tear them off. Sophia was so drunk that I couldn't even tear them off. I saw him 5 or 6 times, but he ignored me. Alas, they were a good-looking couple. Why did they break up when they graduated? Who would have known? If they hadn't broken up at that time, Lily would have made a fortune now. Yeah, who would have thought that Ethan, who was silent at the beginning, would have become the most promising among our group. Remember the last time he donated 100 million to the school? He was really generous. I can only say that, as I said before, Lily is not that lucky. I lowered my head, pretending to pick carrots, listening to the two of them gossiping and slowly leaving. I didn't want to have too much contact with my former classmates, and my interest in going out shopping was gone. I quickly bought everything and prepared to leave. But I met the two classmates again at the cashier. They greeted me warmly, and when they saw me coming out alone, they enthusiastically invited me to go out for dinner with them. I declined. No, someone is waiting for me at home. They looked like they were eating melons. Who? Of course, it was my old father and mother. But it was just a casual chat, and I didn't think of what to say for a while, so I was dragged to a nearby restaurant hand in hand by the two of them. I had to call the driver to let him go first, and I accompanied the two classmates to dinner, and then accompanied them to play golf after dinner. I didn't understand why two young girls wanted to play golf. I didn't even know which direction the gate of the golf course opened. Entering an unfamiliar environment, I was a little restrained. I followed the two classmates and watched them take out their membership cards with ease and lead me in with familiarity. There were many people on the golf course. I saw Edward at a glance, and then I saw Ethan. Finally, it was confirmed that Edward and Ethan were talking happily. This scene was really hard to comment on. In addition to Edward and Ethan, they were accompanied by Ryan and several other people I didn't know, but judging by their clothes, they should all be local businessmen. The place where this group of people stood was conspicuous, and Edward and Ethan were young talents with looks that were no less than those of stars. Naturally, there was curiosity and scrutiny from all directions, and the female classmate who brought me here also saw them. They knew Ethan, and seemed to know the local bosses, but none of them knew Edward. Although they didn't recognize him, they recognized his clothing brand, Ryan who followed him, and the Patek Philippe on his wrist. We didn't intend to say hello to Edward and the others, so we just treated them as two groups of people who didn't know each other and came to play. Unexpectedly, Edward also looked up at this time, saw us not far away, glanced at me, suddenly smiled, and said to me gently, "Come here." The classmates who came with me were full of confusion, probably guessing who he was talking to. I lifted my foot and walked over slowly. He touched my face. "It's so cold, why don't you put on more clothes?" Then he took the coat beside him and put it on me. Then he held my hand and smiled and said to the people walking with me, "Let me introduce you, this is my wife, Lily." Ethan's face suddenly became ugly. Most businessmen are sweet-mouthed. I guess they didn't even see what I looked like, but they started to praise me, saying that I have temperament and that I match Edward very well. Every time he said more, Ethan's face became uglier. No one cared about my life or death. Although I didn't care what Ethan thought, it was really hard for me not to be embarrassed in this situation where my ex-boyfriend and current boyfriend met. I was about to say something with a hot face, when I heard Ethan's cold voice ask, "Is Edward your husband?" Edward was stunned, looking at Ethan and then at me. I admitted it, and looked at Edward and said, "He is the person I told you about before." Edward said, frowned and glanced at Ethan. His previous appreciation and recognition for him instantly disappeared, leaving only dissatisfaction. He let go of my hand and asked, "Can I talk for a minute?" Ethan didn't refuse, and the two of us walked away together. The remaining circle of people surrounded me, and the two classmates looked like they were gossiping and sharing. "You are so lucky." Ethan left and a handsome guy came. "Did you save the universe in your last life? We thought it was a pity that you broke up with Ethan, but it turns out that you met someone better. So who is this person? Is he a mixed blood? Too handsome, isn't he? If I'm not mistaken, he seems to have blue eyes, but black hair, and glowing white skin. He is absolutely the best." The two of them talked back and forth, vowing to learn about Edward's 3 generations of ancestors from me. I was worried that Ethan and Edward would fight, so I had no intention of answering their inner doubts. I just tilted my head and looked at Edward. Unexpectedly, no one took action. Edward said a few words and then walked back, while Ethan looked at me sadly and stumbled away from the golf course. In fact, I never had a deep hatred for Ethan. Looking back on our years, he has been very good to me since childhood. The only time he was not good was before we broke up. But if you stand in his perspective, it is not difficult to understand. I have never blamed him, nor have I asked him to become a saint and stay with me no matter what happens. It's just like the old people often say, words are like spilled water. I know he didn't want to say that to me at the time, and I also understood in the days that followed that he just said to me to get out because he was upset for a while, but unfortunately, there is no turning back. Ethan and I, maybe when we meet again in the future, we will just say hello and that's it. We can't even be friends. 20 years of relationship finally became strangers. I can only sigh that fate is as thin as a traveler who meets by chance. On the way home from the golf course, Edward was driving and I was sitting in the passenger seat. As usual, I asked him some meaningless questions that he was always happy to answer. "Edward, can I eat watermelon after we get home?" "Of course." Then can I read your book? Sure. Then can you hold me to sleep tonight? Sure. After saying the last sure, he smiled to himself before I could ask again. Lily, don't ask anymore. You know I will agree to anything. I turned my head to look at him. The colorful signs and street lights outside the shops that were retreating one after another hit his face, blurring it into a light and dark shadow on his face. His expression was happy, and I looked at him all the way. With a heartbeat of joy, I congratulated myself countless times. It was really great to meet Edward. When Edward proposed, Lily agreed easily, but there was always a thorn in her heart, so on the night they walked out of the registry office, Lily took a long bath in the bathroom. When Edward called her for the third time, she came out reluctantly. Edward didn't want to do anything at first. He took out the hairdryer and wanted to blow her hair, but she was only wearing his shirt, nothing else. Edward felt inexplicably hot. This was a hint, but also tacit consent. Lily held his hand, trembling and saying, "But, maybe I'll be a little dirty." He subconsciously said, "Didn't I take a shower?" As soon as she finished speaking, he immediately realized what she meant, and his charming emotions were extinguished as if by cold water. So he made his voice very gentle, looked into her eyes, and repeated, "Didn't you take a bath? Baby, you are obviously very clean." He picked her up and put her back on the bed, and began to blow her hair, dried her hair, and wrapped it into a sushi roll with a quilt, and couldn't help but praise, "What a cute sushi roll." Finally making her laugh, he held the sushi roll to his chest and lay down, with a soft tone, "Baby, let's not think about these unhappy things in the future, look forward, okay? This is my first time to like someone, and there may be some things I do poorly. If you are unhappy, tell me. Compared to those who have been in love since childhood, we met not too early, can you accompany me to create more beautiful memories?" Lily lay on his chest, let her tears fall on his pajamas, and gently, Edward kissed the top of her head. "Thank you, Lily." The time for the follow-up appointment between Lily and Dr. Laura was approaching, and Edward had finished his business in China, so they returned to the UK together. At the airport, Lily saw Ethan. Ethan stood not far away, watching them quietly, without speaking or moving, but with tears in his eyes. Perhaps, he wanted to say goodbye to her formally. Edward also saw him, but said nothing, just holding Lily's fingers tightly. What did Edward say to Ethan on the golf course? In fact, there was nothing unpleasant, and even the opening remarks were polite enough. "Lily mentioned you to me." Ethan didn't say anything, waiting for his next sentence. Edward said, "She said you two were childhood sweethearts, so I don't understand it even more. Since you have been together for so many years and you like her, why do you want to make her sad?" Ethan said, "What happened between us has nothing to do with you." Edward seemed to be listening to a joke. "Between you?" He corrected, "There will be no you in the future. You are you and she is she." He looked at the blue sky and suddenly remembered, the weather was so good the day I met Lily. It's a pity that she would rather look at that ugly mimosa than at me, a 189 centimeters handsome guy with abdominal muscles. Do you know how many pills she took in the 6 years of depression treatment in the UK? 2,190 days, once a day, 2 or more pills each time. You know that antidepressants have side effects, nausea, anorexia, insomnia, she has experienced them all. Ethan looked up at him suddenly. He didn't know Lily had depression at all. Edward seemed to be talking to himself, but he was actually talking to him. "Have you seen her when she's sick? She can see clearly, but she says she can't. The sun is so bright, but she easily trips over the stone under her feet and can't get up for a long time. She can only helplessly ask if there is anyone around her. She always wakes up crying at night, but she can't remember what nightmare she had. Occasionally she wants to kill herself. When she goes to the balcony to get some fresh air, I have to worry for a long time and rack my brains to coax her back to the room. I tried my best to give her nutrition, but she couldn't grow any weight. She doesn't cry because she's sad, and she doesn't laugh because she's happy. She's emotionally confused and can't go to school. She can only take time to sit in the studio for an afternoon and watch those energetic students draw beautiful pictures on paper. Ethan, I admire your smart mind and appreciate your ability to grow up with your own strength. Ability to quickly accumulate huge wealth, but you are not suitable for her." She cried and laughed in my arms. I was like holding a broken puzzle. I pieced it together bit by bit in 6 years and finally put it together again. "I hope you stay away from her life. Without you, she will only be better than now." Edward said one sentence after another, and Ethan's face turned pale little by little. Finally, he seemed to be unable to listen and interrupted Edward's voice, "Stop talking." Edward achieved his goal, smiled, and spread his hands very good-temperedly. "Okay, then I won't say anything, you take care of yourself." Ethan watched Edward walk back to Lily's side. He was obviously unwilling, but he couldn't take a step and walked over as if he didn't know anything. All he could think of was Lily when she was a child, with a white and soft little face. When she saw any elder, she would call him sweetly as if she had honey in her mouth. There was no one in the neighborhood who didn't like her. Later, when she grew up, the two elders of the Ding family still called her baby all the time, and it hurt like protecting their eyes. If it weren't for him, she could have been countless times happier than she is now. It was because of him that she suffered so much. Ethan felt a sharp pain in his chest. He unconsciously imagined the scene of Lily being ill, but he couldn't bear to even think about it. He glanced at Lily, who was protected by Edward in the distance. She was not good at speaking. No matter what the other side said, she just nodded and smiled, but those smiles were not forced. Occasionally, she looked up at Edward, and lowered her head when Edward looked back, like a naughty kitten, attracting the attention of humans and then ignoring the stupid humans, with a bit of innocent liveliness. Ethan finally understood how stupid he was to still fantasize about getting back together with her. He had obviously lost her completely a long time ago. One night, Lily received a handwritten letter from Edward, which began with, "To Lily," and ended with, "Good dreams." It was the first time she saw Edward write such a long letter. From the first meeting to now, analyzing his feelings, sincerely expressing the fact that, "I like you very much." At the end of the letter, he said, "It is your appearance that makes me believe in love at first sight. Lily, as you said before, love is a feeling, and you are right. Only when you fall in love at first sight, your heart will be like a volcano awakening from a deep sleep, with the heat and burning spreading all over your body. Because it is too precious and rare, it is an experience that will never happen again in this life. Lily, I am so lucky to have experienced such a precious moment.